Welcome back, everyone, to the weekend edition of week 52, actually, 2014, of iNN's Headlines and Beyond. So yeah, it's the last week of it's the last episode of 2014. The next episode will come to you on the weekend. It will be the weekend of week 1, 2015. So I've backed off on the editions this over the holiday, as there's not a lot of time to watch things. People are celebrating and so on and so forth. So that means we pull back a little bit, have less episodes, but still each episode is a full serving of things you will not find in standard media. We are asking questions and doing analysis that other media outlets will not do. They won't even go near this stuff. And one of the things we're talking about now in this edition is we're going to look at the difference between we call the Humanitarian Democrats and the clueless Republicans. A lot of times we think that there's sort of a difference between the two, but there isn't. What happens is I looked and one of the things you have to do is you have to look at the comments in a lot of different online news media, to really get a sense of what people are coming away with these things. You know, someone reads the article or watches the video. What do they come away? What's their take on what they see? And that's what you find down in the comments. The comments is the man on the street's view of what's actually going on in the world, and how that broadcast he just watched or the whatever he just read affected him. And it's actually quite amazing to see what you see in there. I mean, this is where, you know, if you want to find out what's going on on the Israeli mind, you want to find out what's going on in the Israeli public, to see really does APEC, the American Israeli Public Affairs Committee, actually represent the Israeli public. And if you go into the comments of a lot of these different Israeli media sites, you'll find that they don't. You find that there's actually a large variation in ideas and understandings on things. And so you cannot simply say, oh, this is a Jewish conspiracy theory, because the Jews are not of one mind. They're not walking lock and step in this sort of oh, we're going to get everybody type of thing. And the thing is, that's a sort of a relative few number of Jews who are doing this. So, but the thing is unfortunately, because the Jews are a more visible minority, they tend to take the blame for things a lot more than other nationalities. And the thing is, you do have to look at these things. Anyways, I just said before, I really do appreciate the comments. I appreciate your thumbs up for sharing. This is for Google+. So I need to give a shout out to Know the Truth for his comment. Shout outs for liking and thumbs up. This goes to Mike, 2020 Abel, Ching Ming, and Natasha. I don't know, let's see here. Hi Jazzy is Hijazi, and another one is Mahadiraof. And so I'm not going to try to pronounce that name, so sorry about that if I can't pronounce your name. But thank you for your likes, thank you for your thumbs up, thank you for sharing my videos. And I want to thank everyone who watches these videos, because you're the one who makes these broadcasts possible. It also gets the information out to the public. So if you are watching this and you find something in here interesting, share the video. It's Creative Commons. You can share it wherever you want to share it. There's no geographical restrictions whatsoever. And I thank you for sharing. I thank you for liking. And I thank you for commenting. Anyways, the full title of this edition is the Humanitarian Democrats and the Humanitarian Democrats, and the second part of the second half is the Talmud and the Quran. We're looking at the variations between the Talmud and the Quran in terms of how sexual abuse moves into Islam. And there was there are headlines that we're talking about. We're talking about right now. We're talking about Ukraine. We're talking about the situation going on in Europe, and how the United States really came to be where it is in this position here, and some of the amazing things that I've seen in terms of people who are supposed to be very well educated and just simply not understanding what's actually going on. They seem to have a sense of self that is, I'm not going to say hallucinatory, but it's not realistic. They do have a higher sense of self. They're not willing to listen to anybody. And the thing is, again, this comes from the comments I see on some of these different groups. I mean, the Democrats claim to be humanitarian, right? But what you see now, you see Obama on a level even that surpasses George Bush committing regime change globally. I mean, Obama has been involved in more regime changes than George W. Bush has, and that's you know, and considering how the Democrats consider George W. Bush, that's saying a lot. I mean, the thing is, one of the things is that sort of popped up on is you know, well, one person on the Republican list says his name is Mr. American. Of course, that's the Republican name. It would be Mr. American. Wonders and ponders about what was Obama doing during Benghazi. And the thing is, he doesn't. You know, they have that sort of blame game going on the Republican side on Obama's bumbling of Benghazi. But it wasn't necessarily a bumbling that's going on, because if you sit down and take a look at what actually occurred in Benghazi, it was another Clinton friend who ended up dead. I mean, everyone knows that if you follow the Clinton line, if you did the analysis on Clinton's politics, you know that you know, with James Carville, there's slash and burn politics, and that a lot of Clinton friends have wound up dead. This includes Kenya. This includes also in Benghazi. The person killed in Benghazi was a Clinton ally. So what happened? The guy who was killed during this so-called uprising, it wasn't really an uprising. What it was is it was a tactic used often by the CIA. In order to carry out an assassination, you create or stage a protest, and during the ruckus of the protest and the riot, a backdoor team, a black ops team, goes in and assassinates the real person, and in the chaos and confusion, no one actually realizes that this is actually an assassination, but rather it looks like a protest, it looks like a riot. And this is actually what you have in Benghazi. You have an assassination of an intelligence officer who is now playing ambassador. And so what happens is that, you know, in the news it comes out as, oh, the attack on Benghazi. It's not an attack on Benghazi. It's an assassination. This is an intelligence operation. But again, you know, this isn't seen. It's out of sight, out of mind. It's not understood, and you see this in the Republican list. The Republicans on the Republican list are in many cases completely clueless as to the intelligence operations that are going on around them. I mean, and this is this is another guy on sort of the Republican right. His name is Joe Paley. And he was writing about the CIA torture, and Wes Cheney writing about torture, that the CIA torture was something that was necessary. The thing is, you look at the history of it, you look at what was going on, and the answer is no. Well, this is some of the things we're going to get into into the headlines here. And the way we get into this here is, the argument is that the CIA torture is necessary to prevent terrorism. Okay. I mean, this is what they're saying now, is that, you know, the reason for the lone wolf terrorist attacks that we saw in Sydney on December 16th, and we saw in France on December 22nd, you saw a car hit a group of protesters. And again, this is listed as lone wolf. The Sydney attack was listed as lone wolf. This was one crazy guy. And they're saying, well, this is going to become the norm now because counterterrorism measures have been effective and essentially shut down group operations. You know, you're not going to have large terrorist group operations. You're going to have small lone wolf. This is what's being encouraged now. This is going to become the new norm. And my argument is, well, really, because in that same time period, of basically December till now, for the entire month of December, we had a French school attack in Afghanistan, a suicide bombing. Another one, a second bombing in Kabul. You had the Pakistan school attack. You have attacks in Lebanon, Egypt, and Jordan. I mean, you have enough attacks, organized attacks, and not to mention what's going on in Iraq, that with ISIS, that you could, well, if they were successful at counterterrorism, well, why are you seeing ISIS? You know, why does ISIS exist if counterterrorism measures were successful? You know, if the CIA tactics were successful, why is there still Al-Qaeda? Why is there still ISIS? Why did ISIS emerge? You know, you had McCain going up and saying, oh, the Free Syrian Army, we need to give these people weapons. What do we see after McCain and his buddies went on, you know, on the news saying that they need to give these freedom fighters in Syria weapons? What do we see? We see ISIS emerge with American weaponry. We wonder how, and this is the narrative on the mainstream media. How did these jihadis get all this high-tech American weapon? It looks like they have some of the latest and greatest gear from the United States. Well, how did they get this? Well, maybe do you think it has something to do with the fact that McCain was on the air saying that we need to arm the Free Syrian Army? And they're saying that the CIA tactics of torture were successful in preventing these things? No. I mean, this is when you start looking at what's going on in the Middle East, you begin to understand that the narrative here is just completely off. I mean, you don't. A lot of what we're being told in the news is completely false. I mean, and give an example here. We're told about Ferguson. Ferguson was a black on white issue. We were being told that this is racism in the United States, and a lot of other countries say, "Well, we are shocked at racism in the United States. Look at the gun violence in the United States, and blah 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 blah." And the funny thing is that people, smart people that I know, even my relatives, fall for this stuff. Okay, let's take a look at this. Was Ferguson racist? Well, if you look at the arrests in Florida to feed the homeless, you look at what's going on in Sydney. You have a police officer, viral video of a police officer beating up a young woman. You have abuse. Just go on to YouTube and Google police abuse and see the number of videos that popped up. And what you begin to understand this is the Stanford University experiment all over again. I mean, there's recently a report came out on Rikers Island that there's a huge problem with child abuse there because a large chunk of children who are in the Rikers Island, these so-called youth or young offenders, are ending up in hospital. And why? Well, they end up getting beaten up. There's a lot of violence in there, and people say, "Well, we don't really know what's going on. We have to go and investigate." Well, we do know what's going on. This is Stanford University experiment. And what is that? It's Stanford University experiment. When you give ordinary people a certain amount of power, police power, an authoritative power, they become abusive. They become sadistic. And they start using this power in a way to hurt and demean other people. They want to assert their authority over somebody else. They want to oppress. They want to suppress the other person's identity, and they want to impress and stamp upon the other person. So we see this. We see this all over. We see this in the CIA torture report. We see this in the way that the FBI operates. We see this when they approach someone who is mentally ill. The training is shoot to kill. You have someone has a knife, right? You couldn't just simply shoot the guy in the arm, but no, you have to pump. This is in the training. You have to pump 20 bullets into the guy. You know, this what we're seeing. What we're seeing here is we're seeing TV style violence becoming reality. We're seeing this type of sort of excessive violence that we see in general society now within our police force. And when we come back, we're going to take a look at how now we're going back into the Cold War thanks to Obama. All right, I'll see you on the other side.
iNN, uncut, unedited, and real. We deal with issues that other networks won't.
Welcome back, everybody. We're on the other side of the break. And as I said before, we're going to look and see how Obama pushed us back into the Cold War again with Russia now. And this time, we are not responding to aggressions by Russia. This time, we are the aggressor. Americans are the aggressor. Even though Bill H.R. 758, that's House Resolution 758, which is now law, signed into law by Obama, actually takes the Russian Federation, which is basically the victim, turns the narrative around and charges them with being the aggressor. In other words, this is how the Humanitarian Democrats create a legal crisis and legally, on trumped-up charges, go out and justify regime change. In other words, well, Republicans have an act of war in preventing terrorism. It's about safety and security. The Democrats, the Humanitarian Democrats, use the argument, well, this is a humanitarian regime change. This government is now illegal. It's no longer legally existing, and therefore needs to be removed. And as I said, Obama, in this light, under the UN and in the whole guise of NATO, has been involved in more regime change, or so-called legalistic regime change, than George W. Bush has. And this is not something that's good, because it puts us into a situation now where we are the bully, and the bully is now making sure that the victim is being seen, as the aggressor. In other words, the bully isn't coming up saying, "Oh, yes, I'm the bully, and that's the victim." They're saying, "I'm the hero. That's the bad guy. I'm gonna go beat the guy up." And this is exactly what happens. And this is exactly what we see in the bill HR 758, which was sponsored by Representative Adam Kinzinger. He's a Republican from Illinois. I think he's the 16th district or something like that. I'm not really too sure how the numbering works here. I mean, and his dad, and this is sort of needs to be stated, is that there was an assumption. You go into some of the groups there who are sort of reporting against Adam, who they're on the Democrat side, and they call the right wing watch, and they assume because of his name Adam that he's Jewish, and he's not. He's Christian actually. He is aligned with AIPAC, with the American Israeli Public Affairs Committee, but a lot of Republicans are. And the same thing with the Democrats. The Democrats are, Hillary Clinton is very strongly aligned with AIPAC. And the term for AIPAC is not a nice term. It's known as Likudnik. They support the Israeli right. AIPAC is a very right-wing, right-leaning organization. It supports and pushes for the elimination of an ethnic cleansing of Israel, so that all you have in Israel are what they call so-called defined Jews. They are the sponsors of the nation-state law that was going on in Israel. There's a lot of push on the AIPAC side for a lot of what they call the Likudnik policies. So if you want to look at who is pushing the Likudnik policies in Israel, not only is it Benjamin Netanyahu, but it's also AIPAC as well. AIPAC is part of that package, part of that particular view. And this is not the view of the person on the street inside Israel. Israel has a wide variety of different views. But this wide variety of view is never mentioned in American or European or even North American media. You know, in the West, you're not going to find this stuff. You could have to go outside of the United States to find the information. And I think it's very few Americans actually do look outside the United States for their news. They take their news from all the various different majors in the United States, and they assume that, well, these sources are reputable. Well, not necessarily. They don't necessarily understand that they're being fed a narrative. They're being fed a story. The thing is, if you look at the Kazinger's background, and you'll find that he's not Jewish. What you'll find is something that's quite expected. He's a Christian. He's a Christian evangelical. He works for Christian missions. He has a Christian mission. His parents have had a Christian mission. And the thing is, you begin to realize that this is a person who is from the Christian right, and the Christians on the Christian right do name their children after the Old Testament. They Adam, Noah, Isaiah, Josiah. You know, they give them all. The Christian right really seems to have a love affair for the Old Testament, but they have no knowledge of the New Testament. And that's an ironic thing because they're, and this is sort of a telling thing, to have a view where you're so focused on the Old Testament that you don't notice that you have 1,800 years of history missing, Christian history missing. So you don't know where your Christian names come from. You tend to go back and you start using the Old Testament names, and that's a lot of what happens. And this is what you see. You see that this person has a particular view. And this guy will say he's a moral person. But what happens is that you see in this whole situation here that they're end up defending Dick Cheney. And then the people who on the right will say, well, I don't necessarily like Dick Cheney, but I do agree with him on this whole thing about this whole terrorism thing. And in particular with the CIA torture. They said, but depriving someone of sleep in order to obtain important information which can lead to saving lives is worth it. Whilst the report concluded that no credible intelligence was obtained, though interrogation methods, that is certainly not the case. I mean, the CIA claims to have success. They're claiming to have success. Dick Cheney comes out and says CIA torture. Cheney said that torture was Americans dying inside the World Trade Center in 9/11. Americans who either died from burns, the collapsing of the buildings, or suicide to stop the pain. I mean, in other words, they go in and say, well, you know what? Yes, it's torture, but it's justified torture because we need to stop this thing. They also mention the Boston bombings and so on and so forth. So they come out with a whole bunch of list of things where these are torture. This is a reason why we need to have the CIA doing the torture. The CIA doing this sort of, we'll call it enhanced interrogation now. But the problem that sort of comes out here with this whole narrative is that all the hijackers on 9/11 were on the terrorist watch list. They were being watched by the FBI. They were actively being watched by the FBI. Boston bombing, same thing. They were actively being watched by the CIA. As a matter of fact, they had been in contact with the FBI. They had been working with the FBI. The FBI had been training them to go back into Chechnya to sort of become double agents in Chechnya. Something went wrong, and they wound up bombing in Boston. Now, the thing is that there's a lot of conspiracy theories saying that 9/11 was an inside job. Well, let's do that. Let's go look at it from the military perspective. We'll look at it from a military point of view. And the thing is, at the same time, we're going to also take a look at the standard mystery. In order to have a crime, to solve a crime, you have to look for motive and opportunity. Motive is your primary driving factor. It's why you actually commit a crime. Opportunity gives you the opportunity to do so. Well, if Israel wants the United States to become a closer ally with the United States, and there are certain groups in the United States who want the United States to become closer allies with Israel, then attacks like 9/11 and the Boston bombing are an excellent way to do it. If you want to start a war, you want to create enough energy to start a war, 9/11 and the Boston bombing is an excellent way of doing it. And the thing is, what sort of tips the sort of hat on this thing is, it would be one thing if no one knew what was going on and no one had any idea that this was going to happen. But when you have the NSA spying story and the revelation of that the NSA was spying and catching all this stuff, and they have these top-notch intelligence abilities. And then you find out that all these people were on these watch lists. And that nothing was done. And then afterwards you see a lot of finger pointing, like, well, it wasn't necessarily my fault. We didn't get all the information from this guy. And you know, they start pointing fingers at different agencies as to who dropped the ball. Well, that's just that's after the fact blaming, and that tells you that something more went on than they're letting on. This is where you start smelling a government cover-up. This is where you start smelling that, hey, maybe the government was involved in 9/11. Maybe the government was involved in the Boston bombings. It's not necessarily that there was a vast conspiracy or a monolithic conspiracy, but the fact that you had a variety of different groups involved who had interest in this to see this thing carried out. Now, as I said, what you need to look at to understand these military operations is, military don't look at things necessarily the way the average person does. They look at the term called collateral damage. Collateral damage are the number of civilians. It's a sort of a bean counting type of thing. And if collateral damage is sufficiently low, and that's usually 10% or below of an actual war. If let's say you have an actual war figure, right, of the number of people dead in the war and your casualty in terms of overall military versus civilian, and your casualty level, your collateral damage, is less than 10%, then it's worth it. And the thing is, the 10% is not necessarily a measure against war inside a war, but war from war to war. So let's say you had 1 million people in the Korean War dying, civilians. That's your collateral damage. If the number of civilians dead in Vietnam was less than Korea, then Vietnam becomes a success, not Korea. Even though we end up losing both of them, because one ended up in stalemate, the other one ended up in a complete loss. And the thing is, when you start looking at this whole concept of collateral damage, the number of people who died in 9/11 fell right within the collateral damage boundary. So, and the same thing with Boston bombing. So, in terms of collateral damage, for the people who would strategize against the United States to sort of push the United States and Israel closer together, and that's what actually happened. The United States and Israel became closer together as a result of the bombings and the attacks. Even though these people were on the watch list, and the same thing with the Boston bomber, same thing with the shoe bomber, the underwear bomber. They were all known. This was all known stuff. It wasn't that there was an unknown. So it's the saying that, oh, we need torture for this. Well, no, you didn't need torture because they were already known. The names of the people who were going to do what they did were already known. It was already in the system. And what happened is they allow the system to do what it normally does. And bureaucracies are great at fouling things up. So all you have to do, if you let's say you're a person, or you have a number of groups who want this thing to occur, you want 9/11 to occur, you don't have to go and plan anything specific. A lot of times the key points are already in place. You simply have to allow the bureaucracy to do what it does best. Bumble and foul everything up. Lose papers, lose information, put things on the side, and they never deal with it. And so in other words, instead of pushing an issue and saying, oh, get on this, all they have to do is let the bureaucracy do what it normally does. And the result will be an assassination, the result will be 9/11, the result will be the Boston bombings, the result will be the shoe bomber, the result will be the underwear bomber. And that's all you have to do in order to push through a conspiracy. Allow the government to do what it normally does. And that means mess things up. And that's all you have to do in order to push a conspiracy. And this is exactly what we see here with 9/11. This is exactly what we see with the Boston bombings. And this is exactly what we see with all the cases within the with the whole so-called U.S. terrorist thing. And then there's no mistake reason why you can, I said, talking about before, seeing how McCain was on the air talking about how we need to support the Americans support the Syrian Free Army, and all of a sudden ISIS emerges. About a year later, ISIS emerges after they've given all this weaponry, and there's no reason, there's no mystery as to why people are now calling ISIS the Israeli Secret Intelligence Service. Well, simple. They were funded by Israel. They were funded by the United States. They were given all this weaponry, and they're doing the Israeli work. They're destabilizing an area. Why? Because they need to push the world into these small little caliphates, into small little things. They need to break up these territories, and this is how they gain control. This is how you gain control over a particular area. You break up the large areas, and you start dominating the area because now the areas are too small. They can't be governed by these small little things. They need help by the larger thing, and now you've created an empire. This is what's being done in Europe. This is what's being done in Ukraine. And right now, this is what the United States has done all over the world. It's done this in the Middle East. This was the Arab Spring. The Arab Spring was designed to bring chaos to the Middle East. It was designed to break up larger countries and to get at the oil, to get at the resources. This is what's being done in Africa. And now it's being done in Europe. And this is the Ukrainian situation. And this is how Obama, who is now part of this, has now started a new Cold War with Russia. I mean, and the thing is, then you have someone coming up, on the Republican list, right? Malak the atheist man, right? It comes out, it's time to kick Turkey out of NATO and start treating them like the enemy they are. By ignoring the conduct of the Turkish government, is condoning their actions. Turkey is ruled by Islamic ideology, and its interests are no longer the same as ours. Pretending Islam has nothing to do with terrorist attacks is almost as bad as carrying them out. And they're talking about their support for ISIS. But the problem is that if you look at the history of the Turkish, Turkish Muslims, they're very violent. And the United States has known this all along. And the thing is, the United States is deeply in bed with these people. They're partners with these monsters. And this guy doesn't know it. He's completely out of history here. He doesn't know his history. Anyways, when we come back, we're going to talk about, get into the psychology of evil. We're going to get into our second half. And we're going to look at the Talmud and the Quran. All right, take it easy.
iNN, uncut, unedited, and real. We deal with issues that other networks won't.
Well, welcome back to the other side of the break. As we can see that all on its own, foreign policy is fairly evil. We don't have the altruism that most people think that there is. The media has a lot to do with how we see our governments. We don't see the various different groups. We don't see the nastiness. We don't see the battles for control. We don't see the power. We don't see the evil. And so each side, Democrats and Republicans, liberals and conservatives, battle back and forth saying they are the ones who will improve society, and yet neither one does. And the thing is, as we go into the understanding of this whole thing of psychology of evil, as I said before, you cannot separate morality from evil. And that morality is a necessary thing. Ethics sits inside of morality. Laws sits inside ethics. And morality sits inside theology. And so the theology is equally as important as morality, and is equally as important as ethics, is equally as important as law, because they're all interconnected. Each one is dependent on the other. Well, in many cases, that your ultimate law is dependent on your theology, because your morality, your ethics, and come out of it. And so what happens is that we take a look at, we're talking about the Talmud, and how the Talmud allows for the sexual abuse of children. And the thing is, it not only allows for sexual abuse of children, it allows for sexual abuse, period. It allows for prostitution. It allows for the abuse of prostitution. It allows for the abuse of women in terms of being harmful to them. And the thing is, this is, as much as people try to defend the Talmud, they wind up, in many ways, proving the opposite. In their attempts to, as we've seen, in the attempts to prove the Talmud, is something, that does not do that. People come out with these rather ridiculous statements. The argument initially here is that, to those familiar with the Talmud, this claim of sexual abuse is patently ridiculous, right? Okay. And so the person goes on to provide examples, right? Right? Talk about, Reverend Yehuda said in the name of Rav, a male child who has relationships with an adult female causes to be like one who is injured with a stick. Right? Rav said, this is what was meant. Right? In other words, they're now going to try to correct this thing. They're going to try to elaborate and sort of, fix things up a little bit. An adult male who has relations with a female child has not done anything because less than this, and they say 3 years of age is in brackets, is like sticking a finger into an eyeball. That certainly clears things up for me, that, a male child who has relationships with an adult female, this is what it actually meant. An adult male who has relations with a female child has not done anything because less than this is like sticking a finger into an eyeball. Okay. That very clear, very clear to me. I hope it's clear to you. Right? So this is a good argument showing that this is, to those familiar with the Talmud, this is patently ridiculous. Right? And so they need to clarify this a little bit further, and that's what they tend up doing. The Talmud here quotes Reverend Yehuda in the name of Rav that a sexual act with a male minor is not considered to be a loss of virginity because one of the participants is not fully active. Well, of course, while the female hymen may be broken, she has not engaged in what can be classified as a sexual act. And then although it's certainly child abuse. So what happens here is that this is the person, this is the person trying to defend the Talmud. Well, no, Talmud does not, condone, child abuse. It does not. And here it is, right here. This is his attempt, right, to say that the Talmud, this is patently ridiculous, and here it is in black and white. And I think, how do you interpret this as not being supportive of this, right? It says, the Talmud continues and quotes Rav as saying a sexual act between an adult male and a female under age of 3 is not considered to be a loss of virginity. So, as long as she's under the age of 3, it's not a problem, right? And then, of course, they go on to try to explain this a little further, and so you end up having, in modern America, right, sex between an adult and a child is condemned in proportion with the youth of the child. That is, Americans generally consider sex with a 15-year-old, a 12-year-old, and a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old on a continuous scale of condemnation. The younger the child, the greater the condemnation. And I think it is not proportional. In any form of sexual abuse, even with women, is supposed to be abhorrent. I mean, the whole fact that in modern America there's now considered to be a scale has a lot to do with a lot of the media influence, which is directly an issue or an outgrowth of the Talmud. It says Talmudic law works on the reverse scale. The sex with the younger child is less significant as with the sex with the older child. How did this doctrine come about? And of course, now they try to go in and try to explain this further, because now they're realizing they've dug themselves into a hole. And they're now trying to dig themselves out. Scripture states, and they're quoting the Torah, they're quoting the Bible, this is within Leviticus, thou shalt not lie with mankind as with womankind. It is an abomination. There's your thing against homosexuality. Well, they don't mention that. They neglect to mention it. The Old Testament prohibits a man lying with a man, right? Doesn't elaborate. They feel, oh, that's enough. But notice, the Old Testament does not prohibit a man lying with a boy. Thus, the Talmud sages arrived at their position on pedestry, sex with children. In the following, bestiality is said to be committed naturally when a man uses the vaginal passage of the beast, and unnaturally when a man uses the anal passage of the beast. The sages make similar distinctions for the coupling of a woman with a beast. How does this in your mind make sex abuse in the Talmud patently ridiculous? Because now they're getting into bestiality here. And the whole paper reads like this. The whole paper they're trying to dig themselves out, but the more they try to dig themselves out, the deeper they dig themselves. This is the equivalent of you're stuck in a hole with a shovel. How do you get out? You dig yourself deeper. You dig deeper. That's the solution here. Their solution to getting out of this problem is to dig deeper. And the more they dig, the more they come out with. And the thing is that what ends up happening is, well, I said, well, okay, if this is the case, if you have this situation, then you should have Jewish child abuse groups out there looking to resolve this problem. You should have, a number of problems of child sex abuse in the Orthodox rabbi community, in the Orthodox Jewish community. Well, I went and did a little bit of a search on that, found that there is, and that there's a number of sites dedicated to sexual assault by rabbis. And ironically enough, that this seems to be a huge problem that's being swept under the rug. Of course, where does it pop up again? It pops up in Ontario, with Ontario sex expert, U of T prof, charged with sex crimes against kids, senior advisor to the Kathleen Wynne program. Kathleen Wynne is the new Premier of Ontario, and she's bringing in a sex educational program that is modeled after the Swedish program, which sexualizes children from the age of 6 years old and up. Of course, Sweden has had, and same thing with Holland and same thing with Holland and Denmark. They've had the open sexual relations with children as being normal since the 1960s. So this isn't a problem from pedophilia for the Scandinavians and the Germans. It's not a problem. It's normal. This is now being brought into Ontario. And who is this sex education expert, a professor from U of T? His name has been caught on tape with children. He's been caught making child pornography. His name is Benjamin Levin. Are we surprised here? Now that we have the connection between the Talmud and the Orthodox Jewish community, the problems of sexual abuse within the community, and how it's hidden, just the way that it was in the Catholic Church. And of course, you have people from the Progressive Conservative Party here in Ontario standing up. This guy, Darfield Dunlop stands up and says, "Well, we don't have a problem with it." Until you look back into his history and see that he supports gay rights, that he supports gay rights, open gay rights in the school system. That children should be taught this is normal. Now, you can make the inferences you want from this on homosexuality. I'm not going to, because I think they're quite obvious. And the thing is that is that, well, you know what? You're picking on the Jews. You can't really be doing that, you know? And the thing is, we're not picking on the Jews. We're looking at the Talmud and the results of what the Talmud produced. And the thing is that when we look at this, we say, okay, well, where have I seen this before? Well, a lot of times we look at Islam, we see the horrors that are going on in Islam with ISIS, and you look in the Indian newspaper, you see what's going on in the Muslim community, the honor killings, which go on basically in India. There's an honor killing, a Muslim honor killing, almost daily. So there's another where there's close to 365 Muslims every year being killed in honor killings in India. It's a daily practice. Where do we see this here? So we say, well, you know, are the Muslims really that close to the Orthodox Jewry? And you go into the Quran, you start looking around, you find a book called the Sunnah, and the Sunnah is the practice and the law. The Sharia is the law, and the practice is I can't remember what the name is, and you realize that, hey, wait a minute here. This looks a lot like what we saw in the Talmud. And as you go through things, and you start reading, you find a good site that translates the Quran into English, and you follow all of the various different links, and you do your research. What do you come up with? We come up with the fact that the Sunnah is the Talmud. And the thing is, there's a statement in there. It says the bare minimum that a Muslim must do and believe in order to rest assured that his or her salvation is quite simple. Although the faith and the practice of many Muslims may often be complex and elaborate, reminding students that the detailed and scrupulous observation of rabbinic law in Orthodox Judaism and the practice of doctrinal formations of Catholicism this is essential. So what they're saying is, and they're admitting this, because if you look at the origin of the Islamic schools, they're 800 AD. They're after the writing of the Talmud. And so what happens is you have Muhammad picking up the Talmud, picking up the rabbinical texts, and carrying them forward and basically creating Islam on top of the rabbinical texts. So in other words, the Sunnah and the Quran all stem from the Jewish Torah and the Sunnah here, the Torah and the Talmud. The Torah is the Bible, just the way the Quran is the Bible for Islam. And the Sunnah is the Talmud. So you have a correlation between the two. And you have a direct correlation between the two. And then here you have some of the quotes here, some of the quotes that I have from the site here. And who believe in the Quran and Sunnah, which has been sent down, revealed to you, Muhammad, and in the Torah and in the Gospel, etc., and all those other books that I just mentioned, which were sent down before you, they believe with certainty that hereafter, they believe with certainty in the hereafter, and it says that resurrection and recompense of good deeds and bad deeds, paradise and hell, etc. In other words, they're talking about how to guarantee your salvation here. So what happens is you can apply the whole Talmudic argument now to Islam, and we can see the results. So on the other side, we're going to talk more about that. As in our last segment, we'll talk about how the Quran and the Sunnah actually extend the Talmud, and we can see the abuses that are occurring in ISIS, the abuses that occur in the Muslim communities, really do connect with the Talmud and what we see in the Orthodox Jewry community. Anyways, on the other side.
iNN, uncut, unedited, and real. We deal with issues that other networks won't.
Alrighty, our final segment. As I said before, we started seeing that the Sunnah, which is the second most important book in, well, not necessarily, they're sort of, the Sunnah pairs up with the Quran, and the way the Talmud pairs up with the Torah. So you have the Talmud and the Torah, and here you have the Sunnah and the Quran. And this is how we're extending, and we're seeing how we're extending the sexual abuse that occurs within the Talmud, now occurring within the Sunnah, and how one connects to the other. And they're talking about, and this is sort of really a sort of interesting thing here, to see that you have a rise of not just one type of Islam, but a variety of different Islams. The basic practice, and sort of, in terms of guaranteeing your salvation, we call the core practices of Islam, right? Has this says here? What is it here? It has in their thing here. It says here basically. So the 5 pillars of truth is what came up later on. Well, here it is. The 4 practices, the original 4 practices, right, were the worship of God alone, prayer, almsgiving, and fasting. Right. So here we have here and then they have later on. You have another book that pops up on the Sunnah. This is marked 2005. The other one that goes back to 800 AD. You have the 5 practices that are needed, right, to become a good Muslim in order to be saved, right? All right. It says fasting on Ramadan, pilgrimage to Mecca, 2.5% tax or tithing, performing prescribed Islamic prayer, and stating that there is no other God but Muhammad, Allah, and that Muhammad is God's messenger. So in here, there's nothing about sex abuse. There's nothing about any other sins at all, or evil behavior. The sin immediately means sinister behavior. That's actually what it means. And there's nothing about this here at all. As long as you do these 4 or 5 things, you're guaranteed to enter the kingdom of heaven, regardless of what you have done. And this is why we see what we see in ISIS. This is why we see what we see in terms of the honor killings. This is what we see in terms of how women are blamed for rape in the Muslim community, and that they're the ones that are at fault. This is what we see here. These are all results of this. This is a result of the theology that produces the morality, excusing and allowing for the horrors that are occurring. And we see this very clearly in the practice that was done with the Islamic community in Indonesia, where they're using the virginity tests on the police recruits, particularly for the female police recruits. Because the thing is, they're not doing the virginity tests are not specifically for men; they're specifically for women, and only for women. Men are never assumed to be the adulterers. They're never assumed to be the cause of the problem. The women are. This was true in the Old Testament when they had the stoning of the woman, and the Jews were around. They found an adulteress, and the whole view of the rabbinical understanding of the law of God, and this is where the Muslims get this. Sharia law is an extension of the rabbinical law. Is an extension of the kosher laws. And the kosher laws are extremely self-righteous, because you're not supposed to allow these sinners to get away with it. You're supposed to stop them and then question them, and when they don't repent properly, you're supposed to stone them to death. And this is where Christ steps in to protect the woman and says, "Let he who is without sin cast the first stone." And this causes a huge problem for the Jewish community, a huge problem for the rabbinical authorities, because here's a guy, whether you believe he's God or not, stepping in and questioning the authority, the God-given authority of the church, of the state, of the institution. He's challenging what they view as divine order, divine law, or God's law. And this is something, because it also threatens their power, it threatens their status, is something that can't be happening, and they move to stop it. And this is where you get the execution of Christ. And again, you see a whole bunch of wranglings going on. A whole bunch of politics going on by the rabbinical order to have someone who opposes them silenced. And we see this today. We see it in Ukraine. We see it in the Middle East. We see it in almost every political situation where you have bullies working to try to shut up and silence those who oppose their tyrannical rule. They view themselves as right. They view themselves as righteous, and we call themselves self-righteous. And this is one of the problems with the Christian right, with the Republican right, that they are self-righteous. They do hold themselves above other people, and they're not supposed to. They do believe in punishment, that people should be punished for their sins. They are not like Christ, all merciful and all forgiving. They are not like Christ in loving your neighbor to the extent that even when your neighbor offends you or attacks you, you turn the other cheek. This is not what you see in the Christian community today. And this is why you can't say that they're Christian right, that they're Christian wrong. They're not actually Christian, because in order to be a Christian, you have to be following the path of Christ. If you are not following the path of Christ, who you say is God, who you say this is what you believe in, then you are saying with your mouth one thing and doing another. You are a hypocrite. Just the way the Pharisees and the rabbinical Jews were at the time of Christ. And this hypocrisy has continued to this day in the rabbinical community. This hypocrisy has continued on its offshoots in not only the Islamic community, in its clerical positions, but also in the offshoots that produced out of the Roman Catholic Church, who also assumed the position of self-righteousness. This is why you had the Crusades. This is why you had the Inquisition. The Inquisition was basically the Roman Catholic Church going around and executing people for their sins. The view of, and this is where witch burning comes from. Witch burning comes from the Roman Catholics. And their view was that in order to protect the world, the European Christians, from the spread of sin, they needed to destroy the sin the way you destroy cancer, or if you have an infected limb, you cut the limb off, right? They talk about amputation. And this is exactly what the way they view it as. They view it as this is something that's necessary to stop sin spreading throughout society. And so they start executing people based on this view that, well, this person's sinful, we need to execute them to stop the spread of sin. If they do repent, they still kill the person anyways. They kill the person in the name of the Lord, in the mercy of the Lord. Why did they kill the person in the mercy of the Lord? Because they repented at this point in time. This is when their soul is clean, and this is the best point in time for them to go to heaven. So they get killed. It doesn't matter, and this is where you have the saying, damned if you do and damned if you don't, is that from the Inquisition perspective, if you confess your sins and cleanse your soul, you're killed to prevent you from sinning again. If you don't confess your sins, you're tortured in this particular in terms of your punishment. If you don't confess your sins, then you are executed to prevent the spread of sin. So it doesn't matter whether you said you sinned or you didn't sin. You're killed anyways, because this is the way the Roman Catholic Church viewed that. This is the way. Then this is what was necessary to save souls. And of course, this is what we see today in prisons. We see this view of punishment in prison, not to this necessarily to this extent, but to a certain degree, we see eye for an eye, tooth for tooth, and in terms of the death penalty, life for a life. And this is the narrative that we call that the Europeans call Christian, and they say their view is the best view. And of course, the atheists will argue and say, "Well, no, this isn't the right view. We need to take an atheistic point of view of things." Yeah, but yet the atheistic point of view we see from Hitler and we see from Stalin, they were no more humane than the Christian, right? Than the Christians were. They're no more humane than the Muslims or even the Jews. I mean, the gulags were horrible. So there isn't a narrative out there at this particular point in time, other than the Orthodox Christianity, in terms of actually following Christ, that offers any degree of compassion or any degree of mercy, because you see even the Christians, the European Christians, have abandoned mercy. They've abandoned Christ. And they have the name Christ as name alone. They are not fundamentally Christians. And understand that fundamentally means that you are following the basics of Christ. You are following the fundamentals of Christ. And what are the fundamentals of Christ? Mercy, forgiveness, love, peace. Do we see any of this within the modern Christian community? Do we see this when we see the wars that are going on, when we see the conflicts that are going on, when we see the rape and war? Is this what we mean by this? Is it what we see by Christian fundamentals? No, not at all. Not even close. Anyways, that's it for this edition of iNN News. This is it for for 2014. We had a good time coming back, and we look forward to doing a lot more in 2015. So look for the next episode will be the weekend edition for the first week of 2015. That will be next weekend. We will have that up. And you can sort of, it basically comes out on Monday. I don't want to wreck your weekend, so Monday will come out with the weekend edition. Wednesday will be the Tuesday edition, and Friday will be the Thursday edition. Of course, it repeats itself week after week. Anyways, that's it for today. Leave your comments down below, and I will answer them in the next edition of iNN's Headlines and Beyond. All right. Thank you and good night. My name is Dr. Daniel Karras. Have a good, hope you've had a Merry Christmas and have a Happy New Year. All right, bye-bye.
Welcome to the library, and I am the librarian. I am the professor. And professor of what? Professor of physics.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light?
Free speech rules here at Democratic Earth.